Hello and welcome to the MIT Open Documentary Lab Noontime Talk. Today we have Willis Thomas and Claudia Peña. Hank is a conceptual artist who works across a lot of media and also has really interesting collaborative methodologies that he's going to talk about today. His work has shown at the Museum of Modern Art, the Guggenheim, the Whitney, many other places, and he's well known for the Question Bridge, Black Males in Search of the Truth Booth, Writing on the Wall, and most recently, the Artist Run Initiative for Art and Civic Engagement for Freedoms. Claudia Peña serves as the executive director of For Freedoms. She is on faculty at UCLA School of Law and in the Gender Studies Department. And she's also affiliated with the Prison Education Program, which creates innovative courses that enable faculty and students to learn from and alongside participants who are currently incarcerated. Before I hand it over to them, just a reminder to put your questions in the Q&A. They will have a discussion themselves and then open it up to a larger discussion. So without further ado, Hank and Claudia.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
So great to be here again with all of you all. And I'm very excited to be sharing the stage here with Claudia Peña, one of my longest running collaborators. And we were invited to do this talk, or I was, and I have really been in a mode of reconsideration about my work and my practice, because so much of everything I do is a collaboration, and it's really hard for me to talk about whatever I'm doing without actually inviting the people who help make the work with me to be part of it. So, Claudia, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun to hang out with you.
Did you want to give some background about our work? You know, yeah. You, me, you know, how we started working together, what we're working towards.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see. I think you and I started collaborating on things maybe 20 years ago. Yes. And then my favorite part of the fact that we've been working together for so long is that my mom and you collaborated on a piece together.
Your mother fabricated my first sculpture, which was made out of bullets. It's true.
Because there's literally nothing under the sun that my mom can't do. And you're one of the people who knows that. But I've also been thinking lately, Hank, about the fact that you're always so open about the fact that that you collaborate, that's your favorite form of creating things together. But I realize that even people who don't self-identify as people that collaborate are actually still collaborating in everything they create.
That is actually true. It also hides the fact that I'm a terrible communicator, which is really what drives me in most of my collaborations, which is like trying to figure out how to get a point across without it devolving into something unnecessary. And I think the theme of a lot of my work, whether it be Question Bridge, the Truth Booth along the way, and For Freedoms, and art is like, how do we bridge our differences? How do we step out of ourselves so that we can be greater together? And all of these collaborations for me are about like building on existing friendships and then strengthening them through humbling myself and asking others to humble themselves for the greater good.
It's almost like these collaborations are opportunities to hear each other, or like listen to each other better. You know, as you create this thing together, it's like you come to a better understanding of each other's lives, each other's lived experiences, where people are trying to go. All of that comes out of making something together.
Yeah, they say you can't make art by committee. I am here with my boardroom to challenge that. No wonder I'm all alone. So before we start getting too much into like the specific work, can you give us some more background about like, well, I'm just gonna ask you a hard question, you ask me a question.
Okay, fine.
How did you make me?
I did not make you.
As an artist, whatever, you know.
Deborah Willis. Let's see. I think
shape. How did you shape my
shape is a much better word. Much better word. Well, you and I have known each other since you were even before you went to grad school for art. And I think since the very beginning of our friendship, we've had really tough, difficult, deep conversations about what it means to be an artist, what it means to create, what it means to have, to feel a responsibility to have any impact in the world, what it means to eschew that responsibility. So I think that our friendship played a role in the artist that you become, because there was a lot of pain in some of those conversations. They were hard, you know? I mean, they were still full of love and like adoration and generosity. But given, you know, all of the experience that we'd had up until those moments and since those moments, a lot of that processing of trauma and pain, you know, it came out.
Well, you and I met 3 weeks before my cousin Sanga Willis was murdered. And for those of you who don't know, I'm wearing a shirt actually that says "Stay Black and Live" because, you know, it's not that easy. And my cousin Sanga Willis was my life plan until he was murdered, shot during a robbery in Philadelphia. And when Claudia and I became friends, and probably why we became friends, because you're such a nurturer and, like, you know, come to save the day person. Because Sung and I lived together with another cousin. I was so distraught and unsure about the purpose and the meaning of my life and what to do about it. I didn't feel that being an artist could do anything to heal the scars that were made in my family, but also that existed within our community, that led to, you know, a disproportionate number of African American men being killed by African American men, and address the legacy of systemic racism and, you know, colonialization and slavery that and genocide and gender dynamics that imprison so many of us, both literally and figuratively, and divide us. And it's like, I don't know what to do. And I would say, did you answer the question fully?
I don't know if I did, but I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
How do you think, you were already an artist before Sunga was killed?
Mm-hmm.
But the direction of your art, you know, changed drastically, I would say, after he was killed. In what ways might that have looked different if Sunga was still with us here, walking on Earth? Or, if you want to answer it differently, in what ways did that experience shape the legacy of your art making?
The harder question is the first one, so I'm going to try to answer that one. Who would I be if my cousin hadn't been murdered, and how would my work as an artist manifest? I am a very shy person. Socially awkward, virtually resistant to putting myself out there, except when I'm forced to. And then when I'm forced to, I just go with it. And when my cousin was murdered, I went from being like this shy guy that no one paid attention to being this person that people look to within my family for support, guidance, strength, and courage. And, you know, you fake it till you make it. So I'm still faking it. But when I asked the question, which is really hard, like, would I be an artist to the degree, would I still be an artist? Would I be a successful fine artist, commercial artist, whatever you want to call it, if my cousin was not murdered, that's a big question mark over my whole career. Like, is my entire career based off of the fact that the response to my cousin being murdered? I would say no. It's a response to his work, my mother's work, my grandmother's work, all the women in my family's work, my father's work, my grandfather's work, which is about building community and opening doors for themselves and others in the world through challenging status quo and norms. So I believe with my mighty, courageous, awesome big brother figure, perhaps we would have reached the level of success that I'm now having 10 or 15 years ago, because he's a way better communicator. And I wouldn't have had to navigate so much pain and so much fear and trauma on this pathway. What I'm now, addressing is this reality that, like, a lot of the work that I do and that many artists do, Chris Johnson, who may be here, is one of my dearest friends, mentors, and collaborators at Question Bridge, and many other projects, said that every artist is essentially trying to answer one essential question. And my question has been, I think, since I was a child, how does whoever is holding the frame shape our understanding of reality and the truth? I and so many of us have had these arguments and debates with people where we are so attached to our truth and our reality that we ignore the truth and realities of others in order to not lose our sense of self. And what I love about the Open Doc Labs and these new models for transmedia and new methods of virtual, visual, and documentary expression are that they challenge the kind of unilateral I perspective. I wanted to say, though, that the way that you did shape me, which is because you taught me the joy of play. With our friend Kambuya Lajimi, we started playing football regularly. And you just taught me the responsibility of every individual to be heavily invested and engaged in addressing and improving the systems that they partake in. And you are a civil rights lawyer, and among other things. But I really would love for you to talk about, what is it that you do, TJ, RJ, all of it, and why you feel like this work is so essential and how you're trying to manifest that in the world.
I would be happy to answer that, and I will, but you've made me think of 3 or 4 other things with everything else you said. One, your project on framing. Remember the picture frame? Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that just for a little bit? Just tell people, because it was such an early project and it's still so relevant. It's like a timeless one.
Well, so it was so timeless that Joe Biden just used it in his ad, because there's another artist. Oh my gosh, Lorraine O'Grady, who had done a project in the 80s, which I may have seen in my subconscious as a child, where she had gone around to a festival and given people in the African-American communities beautiful frames and photographed them holding the frames, or herself with them holding the frames. And a project that I did throughout college and afterwards was really also very similar, where I was holding frames, and I was really interested in trying to show the manipulation of the document and of photography, and that it's only a narrow slice of reality in a specific split second of time. And the fact that we read so much truth and virtue and value into these literally fleeting moments, is incredible to me, especially when you think about social media, where like, it's all, you know, like we're like, oh, so-and-so's life is so great, because it's really like, that's like not even, it's 0.0000001% of anyone's life that's shown on social media. And so to envy anyone else's life based off what we see is also, yeah, that's the trick.
And that's related to, so in transformative and restorative justice work, one of the things that we are very clear about as, you know, practitioners, facilitators, advocates of this work, is that there are multiple truths. And I feel like your project shows that, right? Because if you look within the frame, there's a truth within those 4 lines. And then if you're able, or you get the privilege to see beyond that frame and to see what else was happening, there's another truth. But it doesn't take away from the truth that existed in the first place, right? Like, we live in a world of multiple truths. And I know that gets a little scary because of how much misinformation and disinformation has been, you know, playing a big role in our national narrative and really on a global scale. But it shouldn't take away from the fact that because each of us is an individual and we each have our own experiences and our own lens with which to look at the world, that there can be multiple truths at once, which is, I think, one of the things that your project showed.
So now, tell us who you are 10 minutes into this, 20 minutes into this.
I'm your friend. I am a professor, a TJRJ practitioner, a prison abolitionist.
No one knows what TJRJ are.
Transformative and restorative justice, which some people think about as alternatives to the criminal legal system. When people talk about prison abolition, they often look to the principles and ideas around transformative and restorative justice as an alternative. However, it's not just about the prison system and facilities. It's also about the ways in which we engage each other interpersonally, in romantic relationships, in friendships, in families, in neighborhoods, in your larger community. It's an entire cultural shift in the way that we think about punishment and punitive behavior, and the way that we think about harm and people who cause harm and how to address it. So we are thinking about these issues at For Freedoms in ways that might connect to the artwork or to the art that's being created by artists in our network, including, I think, Willis Thomas.
Well, I'm going to just give a quick overview of For Freedoms for those who don't know. And I appreciate all the people who came. So I'm skipping ahead because I can't find, you know what, I'm just going to open. You guys can you see my screen?
We can see your screen.
Okay, CNN, For Freedoms. I'm going to sum up, I hate to sum things up, Billboard.
Great. I wonder if MIT has ever had a presentation where someone was going on Google in the middle of
it. I have a prejudice that people at MIT actually probably have it together, where, you know, I probably do not. So For Freedoms was created as a super PAC between myself and Eric Gottesman, with Wyatt Gallery, Joanna Bellerose Samuels, and Michelle Wu, when we wanted to challenge the role and the place of the arts in society. We feel like artists are critical to every society, and creativity is essential. Yet our work is often seen as a charity and on the periphery of real business and civic life. And we wanted to kind of open that door, and we decided that we would first do that by starting a political action committee in 2016 as an anti-partisan gesture to put critical discourse into political discourse through fine art thinking. And we actually started before knowing that our president was going to be actually running for president, and we actually launched in 2016. This was a billboard that has my favorite headline ever. Mississippi residents unsure of controversial billboard's intent. If you go to CNN, where almost every headline is designed to like make you feel either probably anxiety or frustration. This idea of like ambiguity in the news is something that I really, really feel like is the highest success in 2016. So we made a billboard that said, "Make America Great Again." And it was using Spider Martin's photograph of now the late John Lewis and so many other civil rights activists who faced down the Alabama State Troopers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, on the Selma to Montgomery march for voting rights. And that billboard caused such controversy because people on the quote unquote right were like, you guys are trying to talk about race and create racial division in the South, and we don't need you. And people on the quote unquote left were like, you're making a monument to police brutality. And what we were really trying to kind of talk about was actually something even more nuanced, which was this question was, when was America greater for more Americans than it is today? And if we look back, there probably isn't a time when America was greater for more Americans than there is today. That the reality is that the closest you could ever really point to is the 1960s and maybe the 1860s, when ordinary everyday people stood up nonviolently and challenged the status quo to radically reshape the society. And so it was really a monument to those people in that era. And then over the course of the past, 5 years since then, we've done exhibitions, town halls, and billboards, and I'm going to flip through them, in all 50 states, plus DC and Puerto Rico. We remade Norman Rockwell's Four Freedoms, and we have been really trying to rebrand patriotism through doing these events, as you can see, in huge number in various ways, town halls, lawn signs, where in 2018, during the midterm elections, we did 770 activations with 700 artists and all 50 states plus DC and Puerto Rico. And it was an awesome gesture where we reached 68 million people with the billboards alone, and 500,000 people with the exhibitions, and going to where the audiences were to engage. And of course, there's a huge social media and press impact as well. And we don't really normally think about how we can measure art in society because the impact of art is immeasurable, but we were excited through the research we did with the Perception Institute to see that we were able to create like 8% engagement increase in people who thought themselves dissimilar than others, that we were, through our work, kind of asking nuanced questions, challenging people to rethink what we already know and about who we are and who, quote unquote, they are. And artists are scientists. They are actually constantly in their labs doing really critical work that enhances and improves our society. And we now have woven a network through these programs. And this was just in the fall of 2018, where we could see that we had some inkling of an impact across the country. And then working with artists like Christine Sun Kim and Alfredo Yar, so many other incredible artists, it was really, really, really kind of awesome. And then I'm going to skip through all this, but this was kind of dope. Norman Rockwell's Four Freedoms, freedom from want, freedom of speech, freedom of worship, and freedom from fear. That version of America is very selective. The United States never looked like this. And although this was seen as very progressive, from a 75-year later hindsight, you see that a lot of us were missing. And so we wanted to remake those Four Freedoms to show a more multifaceted and multi-ethnic and empowered community, and even wound up on the cover of Time magazine. And Alicia Keys called us up and was like, I want to get my friends to post this, and so got all of these celebrities to post them. And our agenda has always been to be visionary, not reactionary, to actually think about how the society we want to live in and build towards that, rather than just responding to frustrations and obstacles that we're facing, which leads us to, back 2 pages, to here, Claudia.
This is our Infinite Playbook, which is part of the 2020 Awakening, our campaign for this year. And there's so much that goes into this part of the conversation, but really we were inspired by this book called The Infinite Game. Yeah. And it was just this idea that even though it's a longish book, you can consolidate it into a few sentences, which is that the infinite game means that it's the game that keeps going, and the finite game.
Darn it. See, look, this is a beauty. Like, so Simon Sinek wrote this book, and he just covers the other book now. It's all about marketing.
He just what?
So he wrote a book inspired by this book, but his book is way better branded, and it's for like business. So this book.
See, people who don't even claim to be collaborators, they are essentially collaborating.
But let me read this though. So this book cover, since you can't. Why don't you read it? Since you can judge a book by its cover.
I don't think I can see it well enough. You're gonna have to read it.
Okay, it says one. There are at least two kinds of games. One could be called finite, the other infinite. A finite game is played for the purpose of winning. An infinite game for the purpose of continuing to play. If a finite game is to be won, someone must come to it must come to a definite end. It will come to an end when someone has won. Finite and infinite games, a vision of life as play and possibility.
And so this book is not necessarily the end all be all, but what we took inspiration from was this idea that we want to be living in a world where we are in play, where we're bringing people into play, where the conversation continues, where the dialogue does not end, where there isn't losers and winners, but that we're all working together towards a world that we actually want to inhabit. Right? And so we put together the Infinite Playbook, which we encouraged other people, other organizations to use in whatever way made sense to them. Like, take off our branding, put your own branding on it. It's sort of open source, change the language as you see fit, but just putting something out there that is a little bit like our values, right? This is a way that we want to practice. And another word for that is this is how we want to play.
Yeah, and Carrie Mae Weems, incredible artist, came to my studio when we were first germinating around what to do in 2020. And she said, there's a lot of room for play. There's a lot of room for seriousness in play, but not a lot of room for play and seriousness. And of course, when we add play and joy to things, it boosts the capacity and energy, because, you know, people want to do things that are fun. And most of the way that we talk about work is it ain't fun. And so when we started thinking about this idea of an abundance mentality, of an infinite instead of scarce mentality, and we wanted people to play with us, we realized, okay, we have to have a rule book because people like rules. And so we decided we're going to make this playbook, and that became kind of our introduction. And so this is our kind of definition of Four Freedoms. Four Freedoms is an artist-led organization that models and increases creative civic engagement, discourse, and direct action. We work with artists and organizations to center the voices of artists in public discourse, expand what participation in democracy looks like, and reshape conversations about politics. Do you want to, I had a wake-up call. We had a wake-up call. And I feel like we're the 2.0. That like it's time for us all to upgrade our operating systems and become the better versions of ourselves if we want to survive.
Wait, really quick, Hank, this is reminding me of a conversation we had like 19 years ago when, I mean, I'm still an activist, but I was doing community organizing work and you were making art, and I didn't think that what you did had anything to do with social justice. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm. Still bear the scar of that.
I know, I'm so sorry. I remember being very adamant, and forgive me, everybody watching this, I was 20, you know, I might have been 21. I'm nowhere near that anymore. But I remember saying something like, I'm gonna go do the real work. Like, me and the people that I roll with, we're gonna actually go do these things that are really important in the community. You sit here and just like keep making stuff. I can't believe I said that. I'm really sorry.
It's also true, because like that's what we do. We're like, okay, the world's going crazy. We're just gonna put our heads down typically and like be in our art and not figure out how to get the brilliance that so many times that we're creating out into the world, because we're not built to navigate these systems. You want to talk about the Congress and then?
Well, this is making me think of this because this is an art piece. I think of the Infinite Playbook as a really beautiful art piece that has so much to say about, you know, the world around us. Do you want to talk about the Congress or just move through the playbook? Because, you know, we only have 20 minutes left and I really want to get to the rules.
Well, I wanted to I was going to try to do the rules with when we say abracadabra.
Oh, fun. Okay, I like that.
So anyway, yeah, so basically in February, we had a Congress for, we realized we thought about when the Constitutional Congress was created, that they invited delegates from all across the country who were stakeholders to kind of help to make a plan and decide what the future of this land should look like. Of course, those delegates were landowning white men with very specific interests about not paying taxes on the free labor that they were getting. But in our context, we realized that, you know, what would it look like for a constitutional creative Congress to look like? So we created the Congress in LA. We brought delegates from all 50 states plus DC and Puerto Rico, and really started to think about what a creative plan of action was like. What is our role in the society? And this was all before, of course, the pandemic and anything, but then the pandemic hit and everything changed dramatically. And then after the events of May 25th, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, when George Floyd was murdered, let's just say the game changed forever. We were highly inspired by, last thing I'll show before, we were highly inspired by a 19th century movement called the Wide Awakes, which were a political street team that embraced Abraham Lincoln and essentially changed the country forever. They espoused Republican principles at the time, millions for freedom, not 1 cent for slavery, which, you know, when you think about mass incarceration, is still relevant. And they wore cloaks and capes, and they carried torches, and they were the original, like, if you look at this image and you don't think about the Statue of Liberty, which was created by an abolitionist, you know, you can't really make these connections. That this idea that there was a youth movement that through parties basically in the streets as a way to kind of advocate for their candidate, and then actually encourage him, well, going somewhere else, encourage him to actually do what was right, seemed to me to really reference this idea of the infinite game, that they were not, they were thinking about this long-term vision for society, which is, you know, you see it in the Bible, you see it in everything. And we decided we were going to like work with artists to make capes and capelets and use patterns, etc. And that kind of put us on this kind of amazing journey, which I think we should come back to after we start with this, right?
Come back to after we start with the rules?
Uh-oh. I hate it. It's broken. All right. Yeah, can we say abracadabra?
We can.
Or open sesame?
Open sesame. Here comes
open sesame. Oh, we have friends. Hello, friends.
Hello.
In this, as you come in, we invite you to rename yourself as a way to inhabit a different part of your identity than your name might be masking. So I'm going to be Mrs. You. Who are you going to be?
I can't see myself to rename myself right now for some reason. I can only see you, which is great. Oh, there I am. So the reason we encourage people to rename themselves is because it allows you space to think differently, to see things from a different perspective. to use other superhero powers that you haven't tapped into yet, because maybe you didn't really identify as a superhero. You didn't realize that every single person is, and that we all have magic. I can't rename myself. Foiled. The gods are
Foiled.
against.
Well, I'm gonna call you. What is your wide awake name, Claudia?
People call me the doula because I birth ideas, maybe movements into the world.
And so the idea. So what we went into, we started to really think about what does play look like in this civic work, and in the infinite game, the object of play is to continue to play. And as you all are joining us in this, I want to ask each of you to read one of the rules, and as we can out loud as we start this conversation. It's a PDF, so part of it's not working. So,
Sarah, can you read rule number 1 for us, please?
Sure. Hold on. I seem to have a dog. Can you hear my dog barking? Maybe I shouldn't go right now.
We can pick someone else.
And I also seem to have.
Amber.
Okay.
Josh, Kelly.
All right, my dog stopped, so I can go. Okay. Sorry about that. 1, no one plays alone. You know nothing you need to know. The rules always change. Love overrules.
There are no gatekeepers. Bring people into play. Be where you are. Carry your own trash.
Learn from feeling. Let love quiet fear. Nourish joy. Go there.
You're just in time. Leap before you look. You know everything you need to know. Together we are awake.
And there's an asterisk there. Can someone read that?
And seriously, don't take yourself too seriously. Play on, player.
And so these are the rules in which we've been kind of engaging with over the past year as we launched our new 4 freedoms, which are around listening, healing, justice, and awakening, which we feel like are the pillars to any healthy society, the cycle that we go through. And we started to go from the short-term goal of increasing voter engagement to long-term goal of building a political and cultural identity around listening, healing, justice, and awakening. And then I can't see everyone, but if someone can read our values. I like to play, but mommy.
There was someone else who was about to read our last rule. Can you jump in and read these values?
I can. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so our values is insist on the future, provoke bigger questions, present nuanced stories, nourish joy, listen until we hear, bridge binaries, be visionary, not reactionary, and play an infinite game.
I like to play. Do you sometimes go by Anita as well?
No. I don't know you. Who do I know you?
I guess not.
You'll never know with this mask.
Completely unknown. I just don't know that voice at all. Never heard it before.
Never.
Thank you for reading. Thanks for engaging. Are there any reactions from y'all from the rules? Any challenges you want to propose? Anything that resonates? How you see it played out in your own life?
If you want to see it, you go to 4freedoms.org and you can click on, I think, the Infinite Playbook there. And it's made so it can be downloaded and modified. It's nice to see you all. I'm going to keep working on my look since I'm going to stay in this infinite play space.
I love it because it's so freeing, right? I mean, I'm in this box every week doing these lectures, and all of a sudden it feels, you know, I love the way you've taken this hour and just made it something else. And, you know, we all do have Zoom fatigue. So this idea, you know, this somehow you're able to make it spontaneous and real and more natural as much as you can through Zoom. And I think these rules are about that too. Just like let go, be, you know, just be yourself, be what you want to be, and break the rules. Use these rules to break rules.
Exactly. How much longer do we have together? I'm wondering if we should try to take some of these questions.
45 minutes.
Yeah, we can take some questions. Does anyone first in this little group online, any fellows have anything they want to say?
I like to play. You want to ask yours out loud? I see them in the chat.
Anita, do you want to read, as Claudia said, you want to read yours out loud?
Oh, yes, sure.
She's still adjusting to her name.
And it's supposed to say, I like to play, but mommy and daddy won't let me. That's
You
the
can't
whole
shorten
thing.
it.
Pardon me?
We can't shorten it. Okay, so let me,
Yeah, you can't shorten it. No.
let me do this right. I like to play, but mommy and daddy won't let me. Did you have a question you want to ask?
I did. So I was talking about the billboard is ingenious, but when you have these sort of big, uh, kind of big entities and big spaces, I wanted to know, where did you get the funding, and how did the entities of whoever operates this billboard agree to your particular billboard? Because, you know, the actualization of it is so much more difficult, I'm assuming, than the idea.
Oh yeah, I mean the Billboard campaign is a huge heavy lift. It was in 2018. It was even more so in 2020 because we made it even bigger. So to answer both those questions, one, getting funding. In 2018, we did the craziest thing, maybe the stupidest thing, but it also worked. We had a Kickstarter campaign for each state, and people donated per state in order to get a billboard put up there. And then of course, this ended up being referred to as the largest artistic collaboration in US history. Because so many people played a role in making sure that there was a billboard in every single state. And then this year we collaborated with Unfinished, which is a newish startup making sort of social impact content. And they're very interested in questions. And so as you see the 2020 billboards, many of the billboards have questions on them. As for the billboard companies, yeah, they censor often. There are many pieces that we have attempted to get up that they wouldn't allow, that we had to, you know, they wanted us to change a word. We refused. We look for another company instead. We kind of play them off of each other. There's about 6 companies that we work with. And if one won't accept one of our pieces, then we'll go to another and beg them to. It also depends on where you're trying to put it up. Sometimes it's censored for one region, but not in another. We work really hard to ensure that the integrity of the work is protected.
And a lot of that is also because the billboard companies are now more used to us after 5 years of working with us and knowing that we're not going to go away. And then it's kind of good advertising for them. Claudia, should I make a confession?
Yeah, but you got to put it up on the screen first.
You can't see it.
Oh, there you go. I can see it.
Okay. So this was my billboard, in quotes, but it's really Claudia's because she asked this question. We were like, our billboard campaign was about questions. And Claudia asked this question, who taught you to love? On a meeting with a potential funder, and they were like, we love that question. And I was like, yeah, it was mine. And then like we just played that joke all the way through, and now I just feel guilty because I have a billboard up with this question on.
There should be no guilt around it though. My question is your question is mine, you know, like yeah, I'm not the first person who's ever asked this question in the world.
Well, Groovy Girl, who taught you to love?
Oh man, that's a fantastic question. I don't know that I have an answer for it. I think I'm still learning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting because I ask this question almost to all my students, and in many of the spaces of which there's like big community building. And it's interesting because most people will share a parent, right, or some sort of guardian, the grandparent that raised them. And then I always think that's lovely. Those stories are beautiful. But I love to push it and say, okay, so besides the person who raised you, who taught you how to love, maybe in a different form, right? Because oftentimes there's like a friend or the first person who ever saw you for who you really are, the person who encouraged you to, you know, who made it safe for you to come out, the person who maybe was, it ended up being your first heartbreak, but, you know, was the one who taught you how to love in that kind of way. Those stories are also incredible. Yes, cats, exactly. Sometimes it is a furry family member that teaches you unconditional love, that's for sure.
Or a child.
I have a question. Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah.
You just did. You charge extra for the second one.
Another one. First, I just want to say I am so energized by this talk, by what you're doing in the world. Like all the borders are down, and you're like bubbling over into this space of just, it's like the unknown, and you're having fun, and it's like making me itch and wanting to like do something in my own life. That does something similar. And like inside of the space of co-creation, especially co-creation with groups, I am curious, just one, like how many of you are there inside of the core group, and how are you making these creative decisions together? Hank, you said at the beginning, like, you know, the whole, you can't make art by committee, that you're questioning, and clearly you're figuring out a way to do that. But how are you doing that? Yeah, that's the question.
We're embracing the ugliness of it all. And also, it's made easier by Claudia. Because that's why she's the doula, because she, you know, she's a great coach in getting us to navigate through our ideas. But I think at the end of the day, it sounds like a joke, but really it's the joy of it is how hard it is. It doesn't feel fun in the midst of it. But Claudia, do you want to?
Yeah, so you asked how many, for any given project or idea, it's anywhere between 3 and 20 people that are ideating and adding their own perspectives, their own creativity. And one of the best parts about being a part of Four Freedoms and the way that we do our work is that almost nothing you can point to can people say, that was all me. Because it's always part of like conversations and brainstorming sessions and more conversations, and something happens over here and somebody watched something, and by the time we put it all together, like that rule book, I don't think there's one rule in there that was written by one person. Every single rule was put together by at least 2, maybe 3, maybe 7 people. And that's what happens when you empower folks to see themselves as artists, right? At Four Freedoms, we believe everyone is an artist. Every single person under the sun was given by the creator the gift of imagination. And some people take you up on it and some people don't, right? Some people have told themselves a story that ever since they were young, they just they can't make anything. They're not very creative. They don't really, know how to make stuff or whatever. But that's just a story that's getting played out. And the reality is that as children, we have lots of imagination. And if that doesn't get slapped out of you, you continue to make stuff. Sorry. And everyone's got that. So at Four Freedoms, because everyone knows they're an artist, that space is open wide. And then we get to make these incredible things because nobody's talent is being squandered.
What we understand is that when you call something art, it allows people to think more creatively about things they already know. And when you say something's political, it implies that there's something at stake, and we try to ride that line. I see my answer to how many of us are there is very different than Claudia's. There are at least this many of us, which is kind of many of the group of the Wide Awakes that kind of came out of the relaunching of the Wide Awakes at the Four Freedoms Congress. And these events, you know, they include people like Duke Riley, who I owe a phone call to, who decided he was going to.
We are making a bunch of big banners to hang off of boats, as well as supper marches too. What's happening?
So he decided he was going to launch the Wide Awake Navy, and this Navy to bring, and Claudia coined the term, Claudia and Manushka coined the term civic joy, and we created all of these he got boats. He got over 120 boats to go out into New York Harbor and harbors all across the country to, like, you know, to make noise for raising voter engagement. And, you know, these are people like, this is like up the Hudson River. And this idea of kind of celebrating, making the election season a season of joy, where we get to choose our future and our and work together. We also were able to, like, collaborate with Federal Hall, right? So the conversations and the collaborations were like, oh, Federal Hall, the original site of the American government, wants to do something with us. So they are a collaborator, right? Because they have ownership in it. And part of the way in which we started to really think about this the Infinite Playbook as a rule book, or a way to like engage in this collaboration, is because it's so easy to fall into the finite perspective of, like, okay, we can't do this because if we do this, this will happen, or we can't do that. The highlight for us, you know, really was on October 3rd, where we did our largest civic joy engagement in New York, although there were others, where we started at the Africa Center at the top of, and, you know, we wear capes because we're the ones we were waiting for. We're not looking for other superheroes. We have to, you know, embrace the hero in each of us. And and so someone else made flags, and we stopped in Times Square, and there were even more of us. And, oh wait, this is the part I missed. Claudia, there's a Soul Train line. I missed this entirely. Someone started the Wide Awake dance corps.
Yeah, I think it was called, oh man, they had such good signs. Oh, it was like Soul Train for Our Nation. And I think what's really important here, though, is that because we've been focused on civic joy, and we've been talking about the fact that there are so many communities that have been disenfranchised, right? Native people, Black people, women, most people of color, poor people, etc. There's like a huge history here in this country of people being completely disempowered with regard to civic engagement. And we are interested in healing that divide so that more and more people can participate. And so we're focused on joy, civic joy. And through that, of course, you can't have joy without music and dance. And Lily Baldwin, one of our friends from the Guild of Future Architects this morning, said dance is the tool that turns fear into joy. So it's so beautiful that, you know, Dance for, or Soul Train for Our Nation was a part of that. And then here we had this caravan in Los Angeles, and it was supposed to just be a caravan, people honking, noise making. We had our billboards in that truck. It was a digital thing. And of course it ended in a dance party, because that's really, like, when you think of joy, dance and music are almost an inherent part of it.
And this is Claudia's second question, which is also good. When will you make amends?
Is it on the screen right now? Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
When will you make amends? Yeah. This question is so important. So at the photo that's the backdrop of this, I took at a vigil that we organized in honor of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and all the others who had been killed by police within that time period. It was this really beautiful vigil that we held out here in Altadena, California. And what I loved about it is we put it together in just a few days. And I thought there was going to be, like, I don't know, 100 people. And there were 700 people. And this is a small town. And many of those folks I had conversations with, and they said, this is my first time attending anything but I just can't take it anymore. And some of them were, elderly white folks who said that they ignored it. They'd had the privilege to ignore these things all of their lives, and they just couldn't anymore. This was the final draw, or whatever that phrase is. And so for me, the interesting question after that, after you determine that you've had enough, that you can't stand by and watch anymore, that you won't bear witness to this sort of thing, is what will you do? What role will you play to make amends? And how will we bring balance back?
And another thing that we did is we created this text to vote app tool. If you text awake to 33339, even now, you will get updates and learn about your status as a voter, etc. And so we're really applying this kind of, we don't know that much about game theory, but we're applying what little we do know to the system, and hoping that someone who really knows how to do it can do it and make it funner and better. Funner. So that answer your question, Groovy Girl? The reason I answered is because the question, when you asked the question, this was what's up. What are you willing to sacrifice to be free? I was like, well, that's what I think about every time we collaborate.
Wow, you're really
because we get, it's very gone.
No, I was just going to say when you started this whole talk, you said, how do we step out of ourselves so we can be greater together? And I just think like all of this has showed that so well. I was going to step in and ask some of the questions here on the Q&A, but if you wanted to say something.
Yeah, please do. Go ahead.
Okay, so
okay.
Yeah, sorry. Does someone else want to
I wanted to ask something, but if you want to read.
No, go, Amber.
Okay. So I have a question, like one problem that we encounter when talking about like public spaces is who has access to it, right? We at ODL have been like researching public spaces and art, and how I'm wondering how to rethink public spaces through art and create like community inclusivity and like get everyone together. So I was wondering, like, I know all of your projects are like around there like that, but if you could expand a little.
Hank, can you talk about all power to all people? Because after that meeting with Marcia yesterday, I was just so fascinated by the tour of that piece and the rethinking of public spaces.
Sure. Well, I think it's important for us to consider that like what we know to have been true about public space before the pandemic is dramatically changed, so in a way, stuff that you would never think about doing, is now possible. But I think this is a piece that I have been, it started off with this 9-foot Afropic that we collaborated with Monument Lab and the Philadelphia Mural Arts to put at One Police Plaza right next to a statue of Frank Rizzo, the former police commissioner and mayor, who's a really kind of divisive figure. And then my friend Marcia Reed invited me to bring this 25-foot version of it to Burning Man. And then as like one of the first kind of large-scale artworks on the playa by an African-American artist. And ever since then, she's been on a tear, I don't know what you call it, to like take it as many places as she can. So this is it in Miami, where like
wait. You're not actually showing the piece right now.
You can't see my screen?
We can see your screen, but it was the Wide Awakes pictures. So share the screen with the Afropic on it.
So you guys couldn't even see what I was talking about.
Yeah, sorry, I should have interrupted you sooner. There we go.
Bet a nickel for every time I thought that. So this is the Afropic. It's all power to all people, and it's a 24-foot Afropic that this is it outside of the Africa Center a couple of years ago. I was saying it was first inspired by this 9-foot version, And we have since taken it to Miami, to Atlanta, to Philadelphia, and it's an incredible piece. I have to acknowledge my late aunt Yvonne, who I haven't seen, but look at her. She's passed away just a year ago. It's her standing in front of my work, and I didn't even know this picture was online. I got to send it to my family. So the ancestors are always with us. But there's like Marcia has kind of been really saying that we need new monuments, and this Afro-Pic sculpture really is an incredible kind of a public intervention. And this is it in Atlanta, and literally has just decided to like call places up, like, hey, you guys not racist? You sure? You want to not be racist? How about we like make the symbol to Black beauty in our communities? And sometimes it's on public property, but oftentimes it's on private property. So this is outside of a restaurant in Atlanta. And so so there's a lot of things to reclaim. And that's what we've also found with the Wide Awakes and the public engagements we've been doing. It's just like, when we can't get together inside, I guess we get together outside.
And one of the things that Marcia said, so Marcia Reed of Kindred Arts is Hank's collaborator on this piece. And one of the things I heard her say yesterday is that she's not precious about where it goes, as long as it is out and in the public and people can see it without having to walk through a door or try to climb a wall to get to it, right? So like Hank said, in one place it was in front of a restaurant, she'll put it up in a park, you know, as long as there's some connection to the local community, that's what she's interested in. But not being precious about it, right? Like sometimes as artists, we can have a little bit of ego, you know? And we want it to be something that feels a little more special or like has some sort of credibility or legitimacy. And the reality is if we want people to see the art in public, then put the effing art in public.
And then there's other ways, like Jason Murphy decided that he wanted to, his Wide Awake's name is The Super, and he's all about food justice. This is him. And he wanted to, like, you know, bring food to the polls. So we like, along with Joy to the Polls, they fed hundreds of people in Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx on election day. So like there's so many different ways in which the work can be kind of interpreted, and kind of, it's all art, right? Everything we do, if everything is art, then everything can be reinterpreted and made better.
That's great. Let's take a question from the audience. We have one from Julian Plowden. What sustainable resources or platforms are being developed for emerging existing artists by yourself or others in order to democratize and act as a catalyst for art as a vehicle for justice?
That's a good question, because it's actually something that we're talking about at For Freedoms and Wide Awakes right now, is to create some space that's kind of like Etsy inspired, but where artists, I mean, we would offer the infrastructure, the resources, you know, we would do all of that side of things, because artists should just be able to make their stuff and not have to like deal with administrative stuff and financial stuff, blah, 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 blah. And so we're talking about creating some sort of like Etsy inspired space for artists so that they can have full agency over their art, the prices, how much money they get, if selling art is the thing that they want to do, or if they want to license or make it part of something else, you know, just have control over the way that it gets used without having to do all the heavy lifting on the administrative infrastructure side.
I want to tell Julian that you don't need to reference me in Rebrand Patriotism, because Eric, our other collaborator for Freedom, said it. You know, we just let it flow, because I don't want to own words. You know, it matters to my little ego if I said something, but like, really, you know, it's the language. And that's also part of the real obstacle of it is, you know, so many artists have always been taken advantage of and exploited, that there is a need for gestures to have either ownership or to find ways to repay and acknowledge and make sustainable. I also wonder if there's a larger kind of more infinite way of doing things or viewing things where we're making enough opportunity for all of us and taking care of one another that we can have a fair and equal or whatever exchange of ideas without someone feeling they need to like hold on to it, you know. And that's, I think, because I, you know, make a living in the fine art world, which is about scarcity, and I'm not a scarce person. It's a real, like, I'm like, I don't know how to, am I being true to myself if I sell a unique blah, 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 or am I being true to myself when I do stuff like what you all are doing? And when it's just like, it's so much more rewarding. And I want to acknowledge Kat Cizek, who I saw give a talk, I don't know, 8, 9, 12 years ago. I don't remember where it was, at the Tribeca Theater, I believe. And I was in Skype with my friend Kamal Sinclair. And it was like, you need to look up transmedia Kat Cizek. And her life has never, I always say transmedia, and the world has changed dramatically. She wound up creating the transmedia aspects of our project Question Bridge, and getting hired away from Question Bridge to work at Sundance and like transform the New Frontier Labs, and is now leading the field of future architects. And what I see in my work, and I hope that all of us do, is like, we create ripples of inspiration that you don't even know that someone's going to be in the audience when you give a talk or you share your work, that will hopefully forever be changed and altered, and subconsciously, and more likely, but occasionally consciously, be, you know, passing it forward, you know. And like that's it's awesome when you get an opportunity. Thank you, Julia, for the reminder to acknowledge people who really, you know, put you on a path. It's also not necessary, because it's just like, I'm like, the generosity is in your willingness to receive whatever information I'm sharing, and the responsibility, I hope, that I do well in small bits, is to actually to share the best of what I got.
Hank, there's a question that came in that I feel like is really relevant to our work, so I want to put it out there. The question is, isn't it dangerous for art to enter a political space? Shouldn't art be more of a philosophical, contemplative space?
Well, I would say what is not dangerous about living?
What is not dangerous about living?
I think all of our lives are heading in one direction. The end. So, and none of us get to, very few of us get to pick when the end comes, and when normally we don't have much notice. And the beauty of art is that it's an opportunity for us to become immortal. You know, the work that we do, whether our names are on it in the future or not, will be a little part of us that future generations will feel and know and gain from. And therefore, all art is political, in my view. You know, there's nothing that's ever been created by a human being that is not political, especially if it's worth more than, you know, most of our lives. You know, I've seen people draw things that are literally worth hundreds, millions of dollars. I've seen them do it. And like, this is now worth more than my, you know, like, how is that possible? And that's, to me, incredibly political. You know, I think it's complicated, you know. But most of what we know about past societies are through the art that they left behind. And so it's really hard for us to avoid the political nature of it, because, you know, that's how we transmit our values. That's why I feel like it's so essential. And when we have avowed non-creative people leading our societies, up until, our current president, who is definitely a creative, and has shown you all the power of a creative to make the world in their image. And so, if anything, what he's done is he's proven the point that creative thinking is necessary, and if we let the wrong creatives have the control, those who just want to play by the rules are going to be stuck. And I think that's why, and I think he's one of the greatest storytellers in the history of the world. I don't think he's better than all of us. And I think it's, again, about this kind of open doc lab mentality of okay, that's a truth, that's a perspective, but how do we look at this moment in a much more, infinite or expansive way, where it's not about some people being right, some people being wrong. Claudia and I have a dear person who we love, who we think is as smart as us, who's also a person of color, who is a very not diehard Trump supporter, but he's diehard. He's diehard.
He's diehard QAnon. He's diehard QAnon.
He's diehard QAnon. And it's just how do we? He loves us. We love him, and cannot get anywhere by denying his truth. And so those are the bridges that we're trying to figure out how to cross, and that's can only take creativity. And that's why it may be dangerous, but I think the alternative is even more dangerous.
Yeah, it may be dangerous, but it's also the thing that we're trying to push forward for freedoms more than anything, which is that art belongs everywhere and artists belong at every table and every conversation, always.
And we want to make sure about the Wide Awakes that people understand that it's not owned, it's open source. If you go to wideawakes.com, I think there's probably ways for you to download whatever stuff that was made and to join whatever conversations that happen. And it's not about having a leaderless movement, but leaderful. Because if all of us are leading and all of us are following, it actually creates a greater, democracy. And it may seem like we're going nowhere, but again, all of our lives are heading one direction. So we're all going somewhere.
That we know. So there's a question from Carla Bishop. She says, I love this idea of civic joy. Much of my work as a filmmaker is in documenting historically Black communities, and I realize that joy is a huge part in their stories, as opposed to victimization, oppression, or racism. I feel that sometimes the gatekeepers in the art world and in grants funding have a limited frame or perspective of what Black life is. And this is made apparent in the types of documentaries and art that get funding in terms of poverty, porn, etc. What advice do you have to counter this?
Well, Claudia, do you want to talk about civic joy first?
Yeah, sure. Civic joy for us is connected to also this idea of civic resilience, right? And Carla? Yes, Carla, you're 100% right. Black communities in the US especially are, communities that have always been able to survive and even thrive through tragedy and trauma by using joy, by celebrating each other, by celebrating their histories, by celebrating love, and that hardly ever gets any attention in media and, depictions of Black life. I spent some time in Palestine. I was just telling the story recently. And I was there at a time where it was just a really tough time. Israel was attacking Lebanon, and a lot of people where I was living, their family members were being impacted by the attacks in Lebanon. And we were supposed to be throwing a party. I lived with a family that their daughter was graduating from high school, and we were supposed to be throwing a party, but once the bombing started, nobody wanted to do anything. So a day later, the family was cleaning and preparing for the party, and I was like, oh, we're gonna have the party? And I love to dance, so I was really happy. But I had this question like, oh, so we're gonna do it. And the mom, my play mom for the entire time I was there, Miriam, she said, oh yeah, celebration is how we make it through all of this. having this joy, having this party, honoring my daughter's accomplishments and dancing through the night is exactly how we're still alive. It's how we've, you know, made it as far as we've come, and how we will continue to be able to get through tomorrow is by always finding these moments of joy. And I have found all over the world that where people are suffering through systemic oppression, that their ability to be resilient and to continue to imagine freedom and liberation is through their moments of joy. And so civic joy is just one aspect of that for us. And it's, you know, it's a huge part of what the Wide Awakes have been focused on for the last few months. And I have no doubt that when Kamala Harris talked about joy and democracy in her speech, it was a result of all the work of the Wide Awakes and Four Freedoms and trying to promote this idea of joy around electoral politics, no less. You know, like, what is joyful about that? Not really much generally in this country, right? People think about civic duty, they think about civic responsibility and voting as like, you know, something that you just have to trudge and do. But there are many places around the world where voting day is a celebratory day, mostly because you get the day off of work, but still, it's still like a day of celebration. There's food, there's music, there's gossip to be had in the lines. You know, I've been an election observer in multiple countries on election day, and it's always so fun. I'm like swept up in the celebration of it. And why can't we have that here? Right? Like, why do we have to be stuck to the way that it's been framed before? We're artists, we can reframe things, and we do reframe things, and that's where we got civic joy. So to answer your question, Carla, I think that times are changing right now as a result of the uprisings of 2020 and people recognizing how effing racist it is to always want the poverty porn, right? Can you change this story and make it so this woman is you know, living in this way instead, right? I think that times are changing right now, and it's a moment that can be galvanized by artists. Hank, did you want to add to that?
Sure. I mean, I am still learning about joy, and we often are looking externally for things to make us happy, rather than building off of the well of resource of joy and positivity that's inside of ourselves. And we've trained ourselves. It's been said that we biologically have a negativity bias. I'm not sure if that's true. Maybe true. But is there a possibility for a positivity bias that we can maybe civilize ourselves into, if we can, if it's genetic? And joy begets more joy, you know. And I like to go to Carnival in Trinidad, especially because it's one of those, it's a 1 week in time in a very complicated place where there's a lot of things that a lot of people aren't happy about. But for 1 week, it's just like, hey, everyone's gonna have fun. Just like, wait, the whole country could just have fun for like a few weeks? And like, why? Or even at Burning Man, we're like, okay, we're gonna have fun for a week, and we call this world the default world. You're just like, what if like the part that sucks, where you have to have money and like got to be mad about stuff, and like, you know, putting other people down in order for you to get, like, what if that was like a week long, and the rest of our lives was about like, you know, sharing and making the world better and feeding people and being generous and like accepting that things are going to go wrong, and like sometimes you're part of what went wrong, but you can also be part of what makes things better. And then, you know, there's going to be a storm, and then like you're going to forget about it because your tent fell down or whatever. Like this idea that like these collaborations, that civic life, that life should be easy, is not healthy. I think it also I think it works against this idea that we don't have the resilience within ourselves and within our capacity to rise up and become our own superheroes, you know, make myself happy, make myself strong, make myself feel loved. And then acting from that place, hopefully not trigger and harm other people through my own, you know, because I'm emitting that light, you know. And funders are just fertilizer, you know. Like I say that, you know, artists are, the whole system is backwards, you know, that we in the creative field we are the planters. Like, we have the stuff, we have the goods, and everyone knows it. They also know that we're willing to give it away for way too cheap or for free, because we'd rather pay to do it than do anything else. And so we go to people who aren't creative and are like, hey, do you want to help make this creative thing better? And they're like, well, let's see. And I'm like, you're the one who got the money from doing stuff that you feel guilty about. Why don't you give us the money? And you can feel better and I'll feel better. These are the ways in which I feel like we need to really rethink, these whole models where, people who can play this game that they don't even necessarily really enjoy to get money are now seen as like the decision makers and the gatekeepers, and the people who are kind of been playing a different game, the infinite game, often are stuck in this finite system in order for them to manifest their work. So I'm hoping that we, and also within the African American community, we've we've existed for centuries in making art and not having the approval of certain people. And I feel like that methodology has always been rewarding. Not to say that it doesn't cross over, it doesn't get exploited, or other things don't happen, but making it for you and yourself and the communities that you care about, whether or not they look like you or not, is kind of what I think makes the best work. I see this last question.
Yeah, we'll take this one last question. How important it is in your collaborative process to acknowledge each member's point of entry. It seems from this conversation that the entry point is a commercial art stance. Have you considered that this project may be reactive as opposed to trying to coexist with those who oppose our views of the world?
It's funny that we don't make any money, so
yeah.
I don't think this is coming from commercial art stance. I think I talk about commercial art stance, I talk about my own, I don't get to make money from Four Freedoms.
Or from Wide Awake.
Spend it on on the project. I am rewarded beyond money, but I have the privilege of being able to make a work of art and sell it. One of the things that we think is really important, though, that we've invested a lot in is not, going by this dysfunctional mentality that I have, which is that we believe artists should make money from their work, and that we have to fight for them even if they don't want to. And also that's got to be one of our core values, and I'm not exempt of it. But we don't have a commercial stance. We're now thinking about sustainability in a different way, and thinking about how do we, it's great to have funders, it's great to have philanthropy, but if that's the only model, it's definitely a finite solution to a really infinite problem.
All right, I think we're out of time, but thank you so much, Hank and Claudia. This has been wonderful, and I think it's been wonderful for us to see your creative and collaborative process in action, even in how you reframed our lecture series. So thank you for that and for everything you do. And thank you to everyone here for coming today. We'll be back next week with Rainey Aronson from Frontline. And until then, spread joy. Bye, everyone.